everyone, welcome to PhDizzle. I'm your host Alice Cheng, and today we'll be interviewing Dr. Kris Marsh, who got her PhD in Sociology and Demography from the University of Southern California and is currently a professor of sociology at the University of Maryland. Let's start with your PhD studies. So sociology, demography, USC, and you're from that area. So tell me what it was like growing up in SoCal and how you chose to pursue that field of study.
It's kind of an interesting story how I got to my PhD. So it was a foregone conclusion that I was just going to college, right? So my parents loved them to pieces, but my parents are slight dictators. And so they were like, listen, if we're paying for college, we either get to pick where you go to college or we get to pick the major. Like, we've got some money invested, so they're like, we'll pay for college, we're not worried about that, but we get to have some say in what you do. So I was like, at the right age of 17, I was like, oh, I'm gonna be able to pick the college because I wanna go to a party school, and I wanna go to a school very different than my sister. She wanted to be a part of the UC system, University of Southern California system. I did not. So I decided I was going to San Diego State. Party school, I was going to party. My parents said, okay, you wanna go to San Diego State, that's perfectly fine. You have to major in business. I was like, what? So I get to San Diego State, partying, because that's what you're supposed to do. Then I realized I don't really like business. I was like, well, since I really don't like business, I'm gonna stop going to my business classes. So after my first year, I was on academic probation, first semester, I was on academic probation because I wasn't going to class. Halfway towards the end of the spring semester, I got my letter in the mail from San Diego State that said, you have been academically disqualified from the university.
Oh,
I was like, here's how much in denial I was. We didn't really have internet. We didn't have like internet back then, back in the States, back in the dark ages. I literally pulled out a dictionary to see what disqualified meant. And so I was like, I'm just disqualified from this major. I'm just disqualified from going to hang out. I was living in denial.
Did you intercept that letter from your parents, or did they get it first?
Oh, honey, it came to my apartment in college.
Okay,
It did not go home. So I was like, what am I going to do? So I had to go to a junior college. I think it was Grossmont College. I had to figure out what the heck I was going to do. Have yet to tell my parents. I called my parents and I was like, listen, I want to be grown up. I'm tired of you taking care of me. I want to get a job. I want to pay my own tuition, because I couldn't have them paying tuition at San Diego State if I wasn't there. So they were like, okay, Kris, do you? Well, I'm sure you'll be back soon. They're like, yeah. So I now have to get a job. Wow. I've got to go to junior college, bring up my GPA, and figure out how to get back in San Diego State and graduate in 4 years so my parents are not completely disappointed in me. So I literally was sitting in a class. So we were talking about sociology, and it just clicked. I absolutely just got sociology. So, and I looked through like the manual for like how do you get the number of units you need to get out of class, out of college. And I was like, ooh, sociology only needs a certain amount of numbers of units. That's great. It was either sociology or Spanish. They both took the least amount of units to get out. I speak way too fast for Spanish, and I'm not real good in foreign language. So I was like, it's sociology. But here's the cool part about this. The professor, he was like, Kris, you get sociology, you should consider getting a PhD in sociology. And I literally was like, how do you spell that? I was like, I'm just trying to graduate so my parents aren't upset with me. And he's like, you should really think about a PhD. And the professor could have said one of two things. He could have been like, hey, Kris, you know what? College really isn't for you. You should go be a hairdresser, which my high school college counselor told me I should do because I have like a lot of, I'm an outgoing kind of person.
Yeah.
So
that doesn't mean you have to be a hairdresser, but
okay.
Unpack
that later. So he could have said, you just don't, college is just not for you. But he was like, I see the sociological imagination has come alive in everything you say, everything that you do, you should definitely get a PhD. So professors have a lot to say, and they can help chart the course for students. So as professors, we need to think about the things that we do say to our students, because it can be impactful both in a positive way as well in a negative way. So I got back into San Diego State. I called my parents and I was like, yeah, I don't like this working thing. Please continue to pay for my schooling. And it's a wrap.
Oh my God.
So I ended up graduating from San Diego State, and anybody knows your GPA can plummet easily, but it's really hard to bring your GPA back up. I might have graduated with a 2.5, maybe.
Oh my God.
Don't remember, but I'm like, you know what? I'm not stopping here. I'm going on to get a PhD. I then eventually get to University of Southern California, and I start doing my PhD work there. and I'm trying to decide what I kind of want to do research on. And so I realized that when I looked at the social science literature, there was not a lot of work that was done on the Black middle class. There was a lot of work that was done on the Black poor. I'm like, and I get that. I'm like, but here's what I decided young in my PhD trajectory. I was not going to pimp the poor to make my academic career. I'm not going to publish all this work to say Blacks have high levels of unemployment, Blacks have high levels of single parenthood. I'm not doing that, right? Because I don't want to do that conversation. There's an additional conversation that we need to have, and that additional conversation should be, let's look at the other extreme of Black America and try to understand all of Black America. But if most of the scholars that don't look like me focus on the poor part, but don't engage in this part of the conversation, you're not providing a full context to the story. I started out wanting to really study the Black middle class and their segregation patterns, where they choose to live. You being in LA, you understand, like, we have census tracts in LA that have multi-million-dollar homes, but we also have housing projects in the same census tract. So it becomes a very interesting question about where the Black middle class lives, like in Los Angeles. And I wanted to compare a couple other states, a couple of cities across the country. But as I'm slowly also becoming aware of like the demographic literature and what's going on in demographic literature, I'm seeing that there's a growth in people that are single and living alone. So I was like, okay, I'm starting to hear the rumblings. So for the dissertation, I really just looked at all household types, and I included people that were single and living alone as one of the household types. But as an academic, and especially as a social scientist, I also had to be aware of the current context in which I was understanding these two literatures coming together. Me and my two sisters, who were both single, we decided to buy a house together. And there were two other single adults on our same street that were buying a house together. And I was like, okay, there's really something to be said about people that are single and living alone in this new kind of Black middle class. I was like, I really want to extend that conversation because it's happening in the social context. I can see it, but I don't hear it in the literature. So I'm trying to bring that narrative to the literature. So finished up my PhD really focusing on all Black households, but from there I then pivot and then kind of shifted to focus on people that are single and living alone in the Black middle class. I'm now writing a book with Cambridge University Press. I'm revising a book. I submitted the book to Cambridge last year and I got 15 pages, single space of revisions that I have to do. Let's be very clear. So when I got the letter from the editor, I immediately went to the grocery store and got Oreo cookies and Haagen-Dazs ice cream. And I was, oh my God. And Oreo cookies, Haagen-Dazs ice cream, and a whole bunch of tears. But then I realized 15 pages, single space of revisions is a good thing, because if the book sucks and it was horrible, you would have sent a half a paragraph like, this sucks, don't publish it, But they said there's some fundamental flaws in this. If you focus on this, this, and this, then we would definitely we would like to publish it. So now I'm doing the book and I'm revising it, and I plan to get it back to Cambridge hopefully this year. Hopefully it'll come out early next year. Knock on wood that I actually get that done. We'll just see. The other thing that's really important that I really am excited about working on as well is that I went to South Africa on a Fulbright in 2017. And I was so excited to go to South Africa because when you think about South Africa, you know, as PhDs, or aspiring PhDs, we've all been up at 3 o'clock in the morning, the TV's on, you see a little Black boy with a big stomach with a fly on his face, like, feed me for $1, you know, they're in South Africa. So that's kind of the narrative that we think about when we think about South Africa, right? We think about famine, we think about HIV, we think about apartheid. But there is a thriving Black middle class in South Africa. So when you say South Africa, you're going to have to explain which part of South Africa you're talking about, because similar to my work on the Black middle class is not a monolithic. You're going to have to clarify what part of the Black middle class you're talking about. When you speak of South Africa, you're going to have to do that same kind of comparison. Like, you're talking about, are you talking about the HIV? Are you talking about people that are middle class? So I was able to go to South Africa and collect interview data with over 80, maybe 90 respondents. And so I'm really excited to finish up this book on the Black middle class and the demographic shift to singlehood. But I'm really excited to kind of extend the conversation with the Black middle class in South Africa. So that's the other book I plan to finish and work on after I finish the first book that I have to get back to my publisher as soon as possible.
So what's the first book called?
So the first book is called The Love Jones Cohort, Single and Living Alone in the Black Middle Class. The reason why I called it The Love Jones Cohort, because there's a movie that came out in the 80s, 90s called Love Jones. And this is where you start to see the main characters portray single and professional Blacks who don't have children and aren't married. And so you juxtapose that with like The Cosby Show, and you had like a lawyer and a pediatrician. And so that a married couple. But now the media started to make the shift away from that married couple kind of platform to people that are single and living alone. And so Love Jones is where we really start to see that shift. And because we start to see that shift there, I decided to call the book the Love Jones Cohort. I have to give credit to my mentor, because my mentor and I were out at lunch one day. I did a postdoc at UNC Chapel Hill, and he kind of came up with the idea of the Love Jones Cohort. So I can't take all the credit for it. So I have to give a shout out to my mentor, Sandy Darity, who's an economist, who helped me to kind of come up with the idea of the Love Jones Cohort.
Can you define what middle class means?
So that's the $100,000 question. If we're looking at it purely from a demographic perspective and a quantitative perspective, the three main indicators typically have been education, income, and occupation. The social science literature is starting to expand that definition a bit, where they're also including like wealth, some kind of wealth indicator, and home ownership is usually the biggest indicator for your wealth. The question is, for the work that I do, so if I have somebody who is single and living alone, they have a MBA, they make $250,000. They have an MBA, $250,000, and they're a lawyer, whatever it is.
Wow.
But they don't own a home.
Okay.
They would not show up in my data as middle class.
Oh, I see. So which could be a lot of people living in urban places.
Yes. Now, I'm not saying that my definition doesn't have its flaws. The reason why it was really important for me to have a very strict measure for middle class is because I was trying to argue that this demographic group exists. And so I wanted to have very strict measures based on what the social science literature has used in the past to define them. Because if I relax my standards and said, okay, as long as you just have a professional degree, then I'm going to get pushback. But if I take all four measures and say, okay, even taking the strictest measures possible and putting them in an index, and I find this group exists, you can't push back and tell me that the group doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But to do anything shy of that then suggests that I'm not really kind of engaging with the literature. The other part too is like the wealth indicator is really, really, really kind of important too. So it's one thing to have income, but when you have like COVID, one of the two global pandemics that we're sitting in right now, and you have income, but you don't have wealth or an asset to fall back on if you needed to draw from that, then we have to decide whether or not you're really middle class or not. So there's a whole body of literature that talks about the fragility of the Black middle class and the Black middle class not having a lot of wealth indicators or wealth measures. And because they don't have those wealth measures, when one of two global pandemics happened, they slipped out of the middle class. So I wanted to make sure they were solid middle class members. So I included a wealth indicator and I used home ownership.
You said 250,000. I just think, wow, that's a lot of money for middle class. So is there like an upper class, or is that just like not lower class?
And so it's so funny because I have a colleague, Karyn Lacy, who does work on the Black middle class. She wrote a book called Blue Chip Black couple of years ago. And so she has these different kind of markers: lower middle class, middle class, and upper middle class.
Okay.
Yeah, and I appreciate Karyn's work. And Karyn and I are friends. I was like, but for me, it's either you made it or you didn't. I don't care. You just squished by, or you're at the upper end. I call you middle class and beyond. I don't make that distinction.
And what you're seeing in this population is that a lot of them are staying single?
Yes.
Okay.
So some of them are not married. The question is it by choice or is it by circumstance? If you look at just like the sex ratio imbalance, there aren't enough eligible women for enough eligible Black men for them to actually partner. So it's more circumstance for Blacks in my data set, for Black women in particular. For the larger kind of push for singlehood, there are some people that are just saying, well, I just want to be single for a little while longer. I just want to enjoy my singlehood and I can marry later. That's a choice. And you can't talk about singlehood without having the race conversation, because people are single for different reasons. We're talking about this whole thing about like systemic racism, which is great because as a scholar who studies the Black middle class, and part of the reason too, besides I said earlier, I just don't want to pimp the poor, so I wasn't looking at the Black poor. The other part is that I want to do an apples to apples comparison. I want to compare the Black people that did quote unquote everything right. They went to school, they got the advanced degrees, they're trying to be in professional positions. But at the end of the day, their outcomes aren't the same as white middle class. What's the difference? Race. So racism exists on all socioeconomic level. It's not just poor comparing them to all of white America. Let's make an apples to apples comparison. All professionals, Blacks make less than whites. women make less than men. I want to make that comparison. So I've been studying race forever and kind of like the systemic issues that people are now just coming to. I'm like, wow, I'm glad you got your epiphany. I've been doing this for 20 something years. But if we look at structural forces, right, how can you, like a Black woman, how can you be like, well, why aren't you married yet? When we understand that there are structural forces that may prevent them from finding eligible men. So you now superimpose all those structural forces on that individual woman. You told her, why aren't you married? So because I'm not married, I got to take on all those social structural forces? Come on now.
Are there other things that you've noticed that might be applicable in this environment that you want to discuss?
So people don't always want to talk about race, right? It's a touchy subject. People don't want to be uncomfortable and they don't want to talk about race. I'm not really allowing that to happen anymore. We're going to talk about race. But one of the things, so 2 points I want to make. So one of the things is like, people don't want to talk about race, and people sometimes don't know how to talk about race. And what I'm finding, like in white Americans and in my network, white Americans are afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. So since they're afraid to say the wrong thing, they're not going to say anything at all. And I'm like, okay, here's what you have to understand. Again, Blacks are not monolithic. You may talk to 10 of your Black friends. 5 might be okay that you call. For example, a high school friend of mine called me and said, I want to apologize for slavery. I was like, I haven't talked to you in 1,000 years. You're going to call me to apologize for slavery. I was like, we had a 3-hour conversation. I was like, now listen, high school friend, don't call the next Black friend and say, I want to apologize for slavery, because I may be okay with it. The next person might hang up on you and never talk to you again. So there's going to be some slip ups that everybody's going to do right now. White people are not going to get this thing right. They're not going to get it right, but that doesn't mean that you can't sit with that uncomfortableness. You have to sit with the uncomfortableness. Think about it like this, which MLK, I think, had made this point. Think about how uncomfortable you've been for the last month or so having to talk about race. Now, think about how Black people have been uncomfortable living this Black experience, this anti-Black experience from the day they were born. So you need to be a little exhausted and a little uncomfortable right now, because Black people have been uncomfortable for 400 years in this country. So sit with your uncomfortableness, embrace it, because it's not going anywhere. So two things I want to talk about. One is kind of like we need to have those conversations. And sometimes if you don't want to get to the race conversation, you can get through it from the gender conversation. I was given a talk. So I was talking about racism and structural forces and blah, blah, blah. So the guy, older Black man, stands up. And some Black folks don't want to talk about race either. I mean, there's anti-Black sentiment in America, and sometimes Blacks can reinforce that anti-Black sentiment. So he stands up, the older Black man stands up, and he was like, Dr. Marsh, I appreciate what you're saying, but it's not structural. It's just that there's too many single parent households in Black America. And if the fathers were in the house and young Black boys were getting more hugs, we wouldn't see some of the things we're seeing now. So my hair was the same. So I kind of rubbed my head for a second. And so I was like, okay, I think that's an interesting conversation. Why don't we kind of unpack that? Okay, so let me give you an example and tell me how we should deal with this. So maybe racism is all individuals, not structural, but let's think about like the wage gap, the gender wage gap. Little girls make 80 cents on a dollar of little boys. So are you telling parents that they should hug their little girls more, and they'll make as much money as little boys? See, there's a gender conversation where he can see that. He sees that women are undervalued for the work that we do, so we don't make as much as men. He can see that conversation. Now, let's pivot and bring that back to race. But sometimes you can't start with race because people are not willing to have that conversation. So bring it in from a different perspective and then say, let's overlay that on race. Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to say is I was talking to a friend of mine who was a surgeon. He is a kidney transplant surgeon, I believe. And so we think about the healthcare industry, think about health disparities and so on and so forth. We were talking one day and we were just talking about structural racism. He's like, Kris, let me tell you what is so sad. He's like, at the end of the day, I have to decide who's going to get a kidney and who's not going to get a kidney. And there's some, especially if you've been on dialysis, and there's a couple of different benchmarks you have to meet to get the kidney, to be eligible for a kidney transplant. So you have to make sure that you never miss a dialysis appointment. You have to make sure you're eating fresh fruits and vegetables, or like some of the markers. So if you have a Black person who lives in the urban area and has to take 3 buses and a train to get to the dialysis and doesn't have enough money for the bus and the train to get to dialysis, and you miss a day, you have now been displaced for a kidney transplant. If you live in a food desert, because we know residential segregation exists, Black people live in areas that aren't comparable to white people. If you live in an area where you're in a food desert and you don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables and you didn't have enough money, so you decided you were going to eat fast food because all you had, you now are no longer eligible to receive a kidney transplant. And so when you think about it from like the healthcare perspective, you're like, this thing about structural racism is so incredibly, we need to have these conversations. They're not easy, but we need to have those conversations. And he's a Black kidney surgeon. And he's like, I want to be able to give the kidney to the person that needs it, but they didn't meet the markers because they didn't meet the markers. The one who can meet all the markers, but is not as sick as the other person is going to get the kidney. Because people say things and they don't always understand what they say, but people say, like, why aren't you married yet? I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? And keep pushing, be polite about it. What exactly do you mean by that? Keep pushing until they realize the error in their ways.
I'll go to a networking event and people will meet me and they'll be like, what did you do this weekend or whatever? And I'll be like, oh, I did this, we did this. Like we, meaning like me and my husband. And a lot of it is like, oh, what does your husband do? But just in passing, right? I understand how that flows from the conversation because I use the word we instead of the word I. But I asked him if when he ever mentions me, ever. We moved to LA for my job. He goes to a networking event. He's like, yeah, we moved. We moved for my wife's job. Don't ever ask about me. Don't ever ask about what I do. And I was like, oh my God, like I thought it was just like a normal conversation. But when you're out there as a man, they never ask you what your wife does. For me, even, I was like, well, these questions are normal up until like recently, you know, and I'm 31. And so I wonder how many people who think certain scenarios are normal until they realize it's not, and then they're like, oh, I don't know how to process this and I don't know how to respond to it.
And so that's kind of like, you know, getting back to the point that I was making earlier, like having to navigate through America as a Black person. We have to deal with constant microaggressions like every single day. And when I was having the conversation, I did a training for the city just a couple of days ago, and we were talking about overt racism versus covert racism. So overt, you know, it's like Blacks here, whites only, Blacks only. Here, it's way more subtle, right? So when you go to the restaurant, now they put the Black people near the kitchen or near the bathroom, or it takes a little longer for you, like now. And so then Black folks are sometimes saying like, well, no, you know, maybe they're just really busy. So we're always having to try to discount whether or not this was like a racialized experience, which is what makes it so insidious. Because like, darn right, that's a racialized experience. And you bypassed everybody else and put me right by the kitchen? Yeah. Absolutely. So that's how it's so insidious, because it causes us to even kind of question ourselves and be like, am I pulling like the race card? Yeah, no, I'm not pulling the race card. This is in fact true. Speaking of microaggressions, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. I love to swim. In fact, I'm a great swimmer. There's not many things I'm very haughty and cocky about, but my swimming, I'm very haughty and cocky about my swimming. I will challenge anybody to a swim. I think there's two parts to that. One is that there's an assumption that Black people don't know how to swim. That's kind of like a stereotype. And two, I don't have the phenotype or the body structure for a swimmer. They're going to be taller, they're going to be leaner. I'm short and I got some curves and stuff to me. So people are assuming that I can't swim. So I moved to the area, found this pool. Now, because I'm a good swimmer, I buy the really expensive swimsuits. You know them swimsuits the Olympians had a couple of years ago? I was like, Kris Marsh will have one of those. So I buy the expensive swim attire. I'm going somewhere with this. A white girl who happens to be a lifeguard comes up to me and says, do you know how to swim? Now, we can look at that in one of two ways. These are these microaggressions that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Now, is it that I was just a new face and she hadn't seen me before and she was going to keep extra watchful eye on me? Or could it have been a biased assumption that she thought Blacks didn't know how to swim? So why would I come in here and stand at the deep end of the pool and try to jump in when Blacks just don't know how to swim, right? The fact that I had to think about it is an interesting conversation. I start out my race courses with my students. I'm like, hey, what is this? And it's funny how some students are like, oh, she just saw a new face. I was like, but if your job is your job and I'm a new face, you need to just do a watchful eye anyway. You don't have to come to me to ask me. That's your job.
Yeah.
And other people are like, it's because you're Black. She didn't think Black people can swim. She didn't see a lot of Black people. It's like, so it's a really great way to start the conversation. How is it where swimming is my therapy? That's the one place where my students can't find me. I can't respond to emails, and electronic devices will just go on the blitz if you put it in the water. So one place I can escape. And in the one place I want to escape, this happened in 2009. Here we are 2020, and I still remember that.
Yeah.
It could have just been, I was a new face, but that's your job. So why do you have to come to me anyway? But I don't think that was it. I think that I was a Black face in a space where they don't normally see Black faces.
Yeah.
And she had to question me. And the fact that I'm having to have this conversation 20 years later tells me that, you know, these microaggressions are real. And sometimes like it'll cost us, even Black people, to even like second guess ourselves. Like, well, am I being overly sensitive? No, it was probably a racialized moment that you were having. But let's talk about swimming now.
Okay.
Let's talk about swimming. Let's talk about how I survived my PhD.
Yes. What are your hobbies outside of research and academia?
I actually call research a hobby,
especially work related.
One of the things I picked up now, being in these two global pandemics that we're sitting in, is I started playing like in with stocks, buying and trading stocks, which is so incredibly interesting. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm having a really good time. But I was like, I'm not spending. You would think I'm spending like thousands of dollars, but I'm like, oh my gosh, my stock is down $1.50. Oh my God, my stock is up $2.75. But the one thing that I am consistent about that I've always done and will continue to do is I like to swim. I absolutely like to swim. It's an interesting story because I almost drowned as a child. My parents had a pool built in our backyard, and my father was our swim instructor. That's probably the problem. So we had our, no disrespect, Dad, but we had our little floaties on, and we do our little laps and all this kind of stuff. And then we got out the water, and we're going to say tomorrow, we're going to start back tomorrow. And I had taken my floaties off, and I said, I want to just do one more lap. And I jumped in the water. I just sunk straight to the bottom. Yeah. And my sister dove in and she got me. And I've been swimming ever since. So once I started my PhD program, like I always kind of like worked out. You know, it's kind of what you do. But I was like, I want to kind of do something different. I don't want to run. I don't want to do yoga. So I was like, I really want to start swimming more. So I went to a pool by my house, by the house and USC. Here's what's interesting about the pool. And here's why I like the pool for so many different reasons. You had everybody in the pool from a retired pimp to a PhD and everything in between. Literally, there was a guy who was at the pool and he called himself a retired pimp. And so, okay. So I would go every day. I would go every single day. I never missed a day. So one day, the retired pimp, whose name was Texas, but they called him Tex. I was like, okay. He was like, hey, Kris. And I was like, yes, Tex. I think he called me, hey, Doc. He was like, if you were one of my hoes, and I was like, Tex, stop right there. Stop right there. Finish the rest of this conversation. So he was like, no, just hear me out. Just hear me out. He was like, if you were one of my hoes, your name would be Symphony. So I said, okay, Tex, please explain to me, retired pimp Tex, please explain to me why my name would be Symphony. He was like, because every time you get in that water, you just move your body like a symphony. I was like, wait, what? Wait, what? I don't like to move water. That's the one thing is like, I want to be efficient in the water, but I don't want to move water. I don't want you to hear me coming or see me coming. You just like, I just kind of just sneak up on you. So I'm very smooth in the water. So I get what Tex was saying. But then I was like, you know what? Here's the thing. Tex was a retired pimp. And so I was like, I'm not going to judge him. That's not the lifestyle that I would support. That's not the lifestyle that I would engage in. But I'm going to be inspired by anybody. I can be inspired from a 3-year-old to a 103-year-old. I can be inspired by an endowed professor. I can be inspired by a retired pimp. And I think when we get to a point where we think we have a PhD and we can't learn from people, that becomes problematic because Tex could have been a Black person and a white person in the water, and the white person would have never ever talked to me because I'm Black. And so I was like, I'm not going to superimpose judgments on Tex because I would never ever engage in that kind of lifestyle. So Tex and I actually became like friends, and I was at least tolerant of him, and we would talk when I go to the pool. But the pool was like my saving grace. It's like, I don't care how long I stayed up. I don't care if I was up till 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't care if I didn't go to bed. I would always go to the pool. I think the pool opened up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I would always be there because it was really, really important. And it helped me get through my PhD because, yeah, you get these really great comments on your paper that say, do you even understand what a theoretical framework is? So you're like, okay, yeah, that's great. I'm going to go to the water. I'm going to jump in the water and I'm just going to like swim this away because like you have like a runner's high, but once you're in the pool, you get like a swimmer's high as well, where once you get to lap like 24, 25, you're just on cruise control and nothing else matters. The fact that you question whether or not I know how to structure a theoretical framework, or I just got a rejection from an academic journal, it doesn't matter because I'm just in the water and I'm one with the water. So I swim to this day. Let me tell you what I miss more than anything else right now is swimming. I tried to get in my pool, my bathtub, and see if I could swim there. It's not working. One day I just really wanted to like feel closer to the water. So I literally put on my swimsuit and my goggles and my cap, but I missed the pool. I understand for humanity, I am trying my very best to stay home as much as I can. As you're pursuing your PhD, you want to make sure you find a balance. It can't just all be work. And you got to find a space where you can't get to your computer, you can't get to your email, you can't get to your advisors. And that's the space where swimming allows me to be. I just want to close a couple of circles too, though. Back to the college advisor. High school. I was good in school. You know, I was like, my sister's smarter than me. She always has been smarter than me. I'm more intelligent than her. We can have a conversation about that later. But she's smarter, I'm more intelligent. We're 14 months apart. Sibling rivals at its absolute best. So I was always Kelly Marsh's little sister. I'm like, can I just be Kris? So I came behind Kelly, and so my college advisor said, oh, you know, Kelly was really smart, and she's going to UC Santa Barbara. She's like, but you know, you're really like social, so maybe you should really think about maybe being a hairdresser. And I'm like, and I tell that story in one of my race courses. I teach race. It is astonishing how many other Black girls have had similar experiences.
Wow.
It's astonishing. Well, maybe you shouldn't think about an Ivy League. Maybe it's a junior college. Maybe you should think about a trade. I've heard it over and over and over again. The other circle that I want to close too is that we're talking about PhD. We're talking about how the professor really helped me once I failed out of school. Was not kicked out, but failed out. How he really just spoke positive into me and how it put me on the path for me to get a PhD. PhD process is not easy. Sometimes it's very isolated, it's very challenging, there's ups and downs. But one of the things that I tell my students, I'm like, okay, if there's ever a point where you like don't just want to talk and there's like a issue that comes up and you don't feel comfortable talking to other people, you can talk to me. Send me an email back with cheesecake in the subject line, because I get a lot of emails. I get tons of thousands of emails every day. But before I go to bed, I usually check to make sure there's no cheesecake subject lines. I don't like cheesecake. It's just that it's a long word. It's got double letters in there. It's easy to decipher. Because students have to just know at the end of the day, you're going to have advisors that are going to be able to tell you whether or not your theoretical framework is sound, whether or not your argument is good. But students also want to know that academics care about them and their well-being. So whoever might be watching this video, if you're having a problem in your PhD program and you don't feel comfortable letting your vulnerability show where you are, if you want to cheesecake only in the subject line and want a little encouragement, I am here to encourage you, because it's not about how many articles you write. It's not about your theoretical framework. At the end of the day, you just want to know somebody cares. And I do care. It was not easy for me. And that is my paying forward for what the professor did for me, because that thing could have gone very left if he told me college is not made out for you. So I am committed to trying to pay it forward. So anybody that's listening, if someone has told you maybe a PhD program is not for you, call me. We'll have coffee. We'll talk it out, and you'll be ready to go the very next day. So if you have any issues, cheesecake me. Send me an email with cheesecake. My email address is kmarsh, the number 1, KMARSH, the number 1 at umd.edu. I wouldn't say it if I wasn't sincere. So if you're second guessing yourself on whether or not you want to email me or not, you listened probably to the majority of this and you know Dr. Marsh is nothing else but real. I would not say it if I didn't mean it. If you need someone to talk to, please do email me. One other thing, kind of thinking about the social context that we're in, everybody's talking about law enforcement and what law enforcement should be doing, right? And how who police the police, and they have unbridled power. And so they're killing Black bodies, men and women, right? So I think anybody that's having that conversation about law enforcement should superimpose that on any social institution that they work in, especially if there's a hierarchy. Let's superimpose that on professors. Professors do not kill Black bodies, but professors know how to kill the spirit and the dreams and aspirations of college students. Professors have too much unbridled power. And whatever solution you have for the police department is the same solution you should be thinking about for professors. And we just don't talk. Everybody's cool with talking about the other institution, but nobody wants to turn a watchful eye on themselves. And we're in a moment in history where now the watchful eye is turned on us. And every social institution, especially in a hierarchical format, we've got to question if we have too much unbridled power. Those are the conversations we're going to start having.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was like getting goosebumps. I've just never thought about it that way. And getting an education, getting a college education, like all of those are steps to moving up the economic ladder. And so if you have somebody or an institution that is not allowing you to progress through that for some whatever reason, then you're also inhibiting progress. And that's
right. So you killed your economic progress. I'm not doing a false equivalency between death.
Yes.
Killing a Black body and killing this, but there's killing that's happening too. We're just not talking about it. It doesn't make the 5 o'clock news. Professors tell a student, you don't know how to do college level work. Why are you here? That's not going to make the 5 o'clock news, but we've broken that person's spirit.
I think it's hard because we think about being in a position of power and we never think about it. You
Right.
know, you're not like, oh, I'm in a position of power, but you are to a lot of people. You influence a lot of people. And so when you see people in your day-to-day, I think it's always good to be inspiring. That's a really great piece of personal feedback too to take away. PhDizzle.
Having fun with smart people that do cool things.